Hello, this is Robert. Thank you for tuning in to my video series on Wernicke's Encephalopathy. This is going to be part 8. Part 1 was what led us to our hospital visit. Part 2 was being admitted into the hospital. Part 3 was our visit at the hospital. Part 4 was being discharged from the hospital. Part 5 was the initial weekend trauma. Part 6 was my decision to start living life in our visit. Part 7 was after our visit to my cousin's house, trying to settle in and learn, really started to learn my wife's condition. And this is part 8, which is going to be our couple doctor visits. I would say the first doctor visit after I began to realize how dangerous my wife's condition was to our neurologist. It was on or about December 7th, which was 2.5, almost 3 weeks from the start of everything, 2009. I went to the doctor's office and they began to run a series of tests. They did another EKG, or where you hook things up to your head and try to check her brain. They did some memory tests as far as trying to figure out how much is she remembering. And visit maybe was an hour and a half there, or maybe a little less. Well, when we were there, I asked the doctor a few questions. My wife was offended that I was engaging with the doctor and kind of, without any better way of doing it, trying to figure out how to take care of her. She looked at that as a threat to her ability to take care of herself, like I was treating her like a child. Which, when you can't take care of yourself, you're like a child. So her clarity as far as her intellect was pretty much intact. She was easily offended by those notions that I was going to have to take care of her, and I was asking questions that she was a grown enough person to ask, and she didn't appreciate my involvement in seemingly disregard for her presence. I knew that she would probably not remember these conversations long. But somehow, some way, she was able to hold on to emotions far longer than she can hold on to the memories of what led her to those emotional feelings. Well, the doctor described to me as best he could what my wife's condition was. And he said that because of her lack of this vitamin B1, she now has brain damage. This damage to your brain is unreversible. The reason that his appointment was as far out as it was as a follow-up was because they wanted to see if she would have any recovery up to this point. He didn't say it, but I've come to the conclusion that her recovery was final at this point. So, however she had stabilized from November 16th to December 7th was it. He told me to begin her application for disability, Social Security disability. And he also told me to make arrangements for her to be admitted into a facility that they could take care of her. I said, I don't understand what you're saying. He said, well, what you need to do is take her to maybe the state mental facility, give her one last hug and kiss, and never look back. In his eyes, and from his experience, her life was over. He didn't use those words, but that's what he was trying to tell me the best way he knew how. I quickly told him that that was not an option for me. I had enough manhood within myself that I was going to take care of my wife. I had spent 3 weeks with her. I thought where her capacities was and where her mind was. And I was not going to take her and throw her in the trash. So it went like this. He said, you need to file for her disability stuff. You know, it'll be an easy process with this condition. You need to take her to the state, check her in, give her one last hug and kiss. And he said, never look back. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm going to take my wife home and I'm going to take care of her. So he looked at me and said, you are not going to be able to take care of her. You're not going to be able to do it. So I kindly looked at him and I said, well, I guess I'll die trying. He looked at me and said, that's your choice. That's your call. Good luck. And got up and walked away. The reality that the doctor had wrote my wife off didn't have any hopes that I could take care of her myself was a pretty dark moment. I guess I was too weak at the moment to cock my fist and punch him in the head like I probably should have. But nonetheless, we go back to that thing about spending some time in jail and nobody taking care of your wife while she's home alone in this condition. So I took her home, and 2 days later we had a visit with the other doctor. While at home, she still expressed the confusion and the difficulties of living life. She seemed to be terrified of what I was doing to her. It was increasingly becoming more and more difficult to provide for her needs. She became less willing to leave the bed, let alone the bedroom. But I wasn't giving up, you know. She began to ask me why I was doing this to her and why I was trying to divorce her. And I continually tried to assure her that none of that was going on and that everything was going to be okay. A couple days later, we went to the other doctor, the gastro bypass doctor, and he did some memory tests, and he reaffirmed what some of the things the neurologist said, but he kind of held this position of hope that she would have some kind of recovery. He asked me many questions about her ability to retain information, and I shared that information with him. And my wife, sitting there, increasingly became more resentful that I was having these conversations with her doctors and somewhat disregarding her presence and her abilities to navigate through her doctor visits. So the conclusion of that doctor visit was my wife's use of alcohol was probably slowly deteriorating her liver to where her liver could not deliver this vitamin to her brain. And her brain began to soften and melt away. Because her brain was melting away, she began to lose the ability to remember things short term and to function and have quick, necessary reflexes in life. It also was pointed out that had she had continued her visits as scheduled, her post-gastric bypass appointments, they may have been able to monitor the drop in the thiamine level in her blood count to cut this thing off. She made the decision to quit visiting the doctor because her second or third visit after her gastric bypass, it was indicated in her blood levels that she was possibly using alcohol. I happened to be at that visit. I squealed on her like a snitch, and she was offended and decided to cut off her visits from the doctor. Several other things played a factor in her getting sick, from empty nest syndrome, increased use of alcohol, to not drinking enough water and intake of the right foods. So she became, starving herself in a way and using alcohol. Those things landed her and caused the cliff to fall off on her thyroid level, which caused this brain damage. So now I'm a little bit educated as to her sickness, still putting the pieces together of the dominoes that was lined up to fall. And I was searching for information about the sickness on the internet, at the library, and this stuff just wasn't, there just wasn't any resources there. There's still not any resources there. He had hoped that she would have recovery, and that's where we were. We had visited 2 doctors. I have a wife that's got a safety sickness, and she is doing things and thinking that I'm trying to destroy her life. One of the days that we were out of the hospital, the Saturday after, or the Saturday after our trip out of town for Thanksgiving, she actually took a car. And let me get into a couple of instances here in a moment.